Hey everybody. So as some of you know, I've been delving deep into my research into more and more about how I can support you with regards to your health goals. And thank you to those of you that did complete my recent survey. That really just gets me to understand more of the challenges that you're facing when it comes to health. All of that has been built into the new nutrition program that I'm working on. So if you haven't already been on my website, 𝐓𝐫𝐿IKA.co, and look through how I can support you, you'll be really excited about the next nutrition program that I have that pretty much takes now what is 6 years of my experience of working on myself in terms of nutrition and understanding every single diet that's a fad or exists, and you know, using my own body as a chemistry lab to understand more about that, as well as working with clients and delving really deep to think about how can I optimize them to have more energy and you know, get rid of this fatigue, to change their body shapes and, you know, to feel good and light in themselves. And so, you know, that's what this new nutrition program is that I'm working on. And so today, what I really wanted to share with you is more on this topic of dairy, because in the new nutrition program that I'm working on, dairy will be one of the aspects that you will really start to understand how it's impacting, and if there is an impact for you on your health. So let's talk a little bit more about dairy today. So the reason why dairy is so important is the one thing that we forget in our knowledge now around dairy is that most of us have been programmed to think that drinking milk, for example, is an important element of our health, because that was what we were conditioned to think when we were told that, you know, drink milk for calcium. Without the research and growing research that has been done more recently to show that not only are there loads of other ways to get calcium-rich sources, for example, cruciferous vegetables like kale or seaweeds that are much more rich in calcium, but by consuming dairy on a day-to-day, making that a habit as part of your life, you are exposing yourself to some of the impacts of modern-day dairy. So one of the things that we have now come to realize through modern research is that, you know, the dairy, let's say the milk that we drink today isn't the milk that our ancestors were drinking. It wasn't, you know, in, let's say, the rural areas where there was a lot of dairy farms. The milk that they were drinking, raw milk, unpasteurized, was very different to the milk that we're drinking today from commercial animals. So when we explore why we want to remove dairy, some of us feel that there is not a need to remove dairy because we're not sensitive to lactose. But lactose isn't one of the reasons, but it isn't the only reason. If we talk about lactose, yes, 70% of the world's population is lactose intolerant. We as humans were not designed, like every other mammal, we're not designed to need to consume dairy after infancy. So dairy does have its strengths as a fast growth producing food item, but that's if you're a calf or you're a small baby and you really need that growth injection. Most adults are not necessarily looking for that, and so by consuming a product that's main design and feature is to give us that growth spurt as an infant, then we're exposing ourselves to things as adults that probably most of us are not looking for. And so yes, because we weren't designed to drink milk after infancy, we do not have the enzyme that's required to break down those proteins, lactase, that we find inside dairy. So 70% of the population are lactose intolerant. Those 30%, they typically find themselves coming from ancestral backgrounds that were dairy farmers. So when you think of places that were huge consumption or consumers, as well as manufacturers of dairy, like France, for example, you think of cheese, that's where there were a lot of dairy farmers. And a good example is, you know, I'm here in Asia where there is still a large consumption of dairy, and most Asians have come from ancestral backgrounds of grain farmers. So the ability to digest dairy is very, very low here in Asia. And what you have to understand is anything that you consume that you're intolerant to will stop your body from performing in its optimal state. So that will make you feel sluggish, it will create fatigue, lack of movement, weight gain. And so some of the things that we want to achieve in terms of feeling light and energized and focused, and in our right body shape, we're not going to be able to achieve those if we're consuming foods that we're intolerant to. Then let's talk about commercial dairy. So how does it differ? So yes, through pasteurization, we do kill a lot of the enzymes that are bad, bacteria that are bad in the milk. But what we're also doing is killing some of the enzymes that allow us to digest the bacteria properly. So when pasteurization, it's not sophisticated enough to understand the difference between a good bacteria and a bad bacteria. Now, we get this impression when we think of cows producing milk, of cows walking along really happily in the meadows, eating their grass, and then producing milk later. But that is not the way that commercial cows operate. And commercial cows, just like humans, need to produce dairy to feed their infants. So if they're not producing infants, then they are pumped with a lot of hormones to keep that body thinking that it needs to produce milk. And when we choose to consume commercial dairy, we also choose to consume large amounts of hormones, antibodies, and things that are really not what we imagine we wanted to drink or consume when we're taking things like yogurt or cheese that are also, dairy products. So, for example, mastitis, which is the soreness of the nipple that happens to the cow when they're constantly have it squeezed and to produce more and more milk, that is essentially pus that is ending up in milk. And yes, in commercial milk, there are small amounts of that allowed to go into the milk that once it's been produced. So outside of lactose intolerance, we really need to think about whether what is in the commercial milk, hormones and all these bacteria, are things that we want to consume for our day-to-day health. And I think lastly, the obvious area in this is to think about what are the alternatives? And there are so many amazing alternatives. I always believe that it's really important for you to really think about your ancestral background. So my ancestral background is Costa Rican and Jamaican from the Caribbean. And so I do find that being in the tropics, I now live in Asia, but it's the same point in the equator as Costa Rica. So I find that coconuts do very well for me. And so therefore, when I'm thinking of dairy, I naturally gravitate towards coconut milk, coconut butter as a great alternative. I do consume very small amounts of cheese, but I take that from goat's cheese and sheep's cheese. And only when I am in a place where I feel that could be very high quality. And, it's something that I fancy. It's not something that I purchase and consume at home as something that I want to create a habit around. So, when it comes to all the other plant-based milks, there are plenty of amazing options now. That obviously the soy, which we need to be conscious about making sure it's organic because of the genetically modified soy. There's oat milk, there's rice milk, nut milks like almond and cashew and macadamia. So there's so many other options, including the cheeses and the yogurts that are being produced from these products that you can create fantastic swaps around, which is really the key that I explore into my nutrition program to create a healthier habit. So I hope that I've given you some food for thought around dairy and whether it's still something that you want to consume. You will find a blog that I wrote a little while ago on my website, Is It Time to Remove Dairy? So that's a really helpful resource for you to read as well, that also just summarises these points that we're talking about. But I would love to hear from you as well about the challenges that you're facing with dairy consumption in your diet. Is it in your diet? Are you having trouble removing it from your diet? Do you suspect some of the symptoms, digestive symptoms, bloating, gas, skin problems are very common with dairy? Are you suspecting that dairy could be at the root of some of the ailments that you have. Yeah, so please share your comments with me around dairy, and I would love to support you in this area. And obviously, if you think that this could be helpful to somebody else in terms of them reaching their health goals, share this video, because it might just be that little tip that they need to get them on track of their health goals. Okay, so take care, and I'd love to hear from you.